We will now start with our third technical session titled Africa, a Trusted Partnership. This session will be chaired by Ambassador Gurjit Singh, former Ambassador of India to Ethiopia and Djibouti. I request Ambassador Singh to take over the proceedings.
Thank you very much. And I particularly thank ICWA for hosting this important session on India's development cooperation and new vistas. I am grateful to my colleagues, Ambassador Gautam Mukhopadhyay and Ambassador Ranjit Ray, who have raised very important questions. And I presume somewhere we would need to address them. Now, I guess I am full of development cooperation right now because my book, The Harambe Factor, has recently been launched by ICWA, and it actually covers perhaps a large amount of nitty-gritty of how India's development and economic partnership with Africa has worked over the last 20 years. So I think the first step, we need to separate the economic partnership from the development partnership. And today we are discussing the development partnership. I see Mr. Madan Lal Raigad here, Director DPA. And that means that the DPA division, which deals with our development partnership, is actually hearing us and looking for suggestions on how to improve or take new dimensions into our development partnership. So, what are the development partnerships that India has normally done? The largest in volume, though a latecomer, was the lines of credit, which came in 2003. But the oldest has been the ITEC program. Along with that, there is technical cooperation, there are small development projects, there are the special Africa projects which supplement each of these aspects. And then there is the humanitarian assistance and disaster relief. Now, if you were to measure the relationship of India and Africa on the basis of these 5 or 6 elements of development partnership, I'm afraid you are in for a shock. Now, I think last week the Vice President went to 2 African countries, Gabon and Senegal, and immediately thereafter, the Minister of State in MEA went to another 2 African countries in Southern Africa. Now, if you look at the joint statement, you look at the agreement signed, there is no major announcement on any of these 5 aspects. So, we are undertaking high-level visits to Africa, but not carrying out what was traditionally our development cooperation. There is a new element in development cooperation, and that is training diplomats, which is funded by the SSFSI. That they have thoroughly expanded. And I think in both Gabon and in Senegal, the Vice President actually announced those which are not controlled by the DPA division, but are actually controlled directly by the FSI from their budget. So this is an interesting nuance. Now, before I call on the speakers, I would request you, please don't give us the history. We all know the history, particularly me. Give us new ideas. How can we have more bang for our buck in development partnership? And it is not easy. I've heard the previous speakers speaking in the earlier sessions. It is 7 years since the last India-Africa summit. I don't know how many years since the last India CARICOM summit, which will be discussed tomorrow. How many years since 2017 with the India Pacific Island Summit? So 3 of the areas which are not strategically high but important in terms of numbers of countries are perhaps we are not able to devote as much time because of the way the world is today. We are overcome. Secondly, I want to note that with the LOCs, India achieved geographical coverage in Africa, 41 countries. The Pan-African E-Network project, the biggest project ever done in Africa, 47 countries. So today, we do not need to do projects simply to cover Africa. We need to do better projects which will bring better achievements in countries which are receptive to them. Central Africa has been notorious for not being able to grasp or imbibe the projects offered. Gabon, which was visited by the Vice President, is one of those projects. But where you cannot go through G2G, why not go through the private sector like in Gabon? So the biggest question I have today is why not involve private sector in India's development initiative, because they are far more successful in Africa than any government program ever has been. And if you backwardly integrate training institutions, let us say a skill development institution with the Olam SEZ in Gabon, it leads to much greater dividends. Second aspect, I think we need to look at, if earlier mentioned, trilateral cooperation. And I think one of the earlier speakers mentioned this dairy project with the Americans in Kenya. There is the Sita project. There are the Indian funded Seva, Dastkari Haat, Barefoot College, civil society projects. These should be pushed. And we have heard a lot about climate change and new things. But fintech is something which is current in Africa. In fact, tomorrow we are doing a whole session on fintech elsewhere. So fintech and other things which are largely in the private sector in India, how do we bring India's development cooperation to support sustainable development goals, climate change, fintech, and the like? And last point, somebody had earlier mentioned the session about strategic goals. I think mainland Africa is a development partnership, and 18 new embassies opened there should actually be fulfilling all our development goals. They should be getting the ITech program fully utilized, the scholarships fully utilized, at least do one project there in a period of 3 years. But strategically important countries like the Mauritius or Seychelles, they are covered under separate budget heads. They are not under the simple normal. They are under aid to Africa special, aid to Seychelles, aid to Mauritius. And large amount of aid funds have actually been used to develop the strategic capacity of those countries. So it's not that strategic aims have been lost. Mozambique is a new case. So just throwing up these ideas, I would look at you to please give us new ideas, which Mr. Madan Lal Raigad and the ICWA team can be jolted into noting down and giving MEA these new ideas and say, this is what this webinar says. Let's do this to have a better bang for our buck. Pardon my impudence, but now I have great pleasure in calling the very eminent Mr. Pramit Pal Choudhury, who needs no introduction and is an authority on Africa and I think senior editor of the Hindustan Times. Pramit, all yours. 12 minutes, please. Each speaker, 12 minutes.
Thank you, Ambassador. I'll talk I will build on something that I have already spoken on at Ambassador Singh's book launch, which is about Africa's digital economy. I'll just quickly summarize what I had said then. Africa is a rising, smaller, but rising digital player. It has a startup ecosystem of about $5 billion. As Ambassador Singh has mentioned, in fintech, it is a major user. Half the fintech transactions in the world are done by Africans. And it is a fast-growing digital economy, growing at 6 times the rate of the rest of the world, especially in e-commerce, in fintech, content. You are seeing a huge spread. A lot of companies there are at least 4 $1 billion unicorns in Africa already. Most of them, 3 of them are in Nigeria, 1 is in South Africa, but others like M-PESA in Kenya and so on are very close or will be that size once they go public. So obviously when you look at this, and I'll just add further, governments in Africa now are looking upon this as a place for them to go in the future. Egypt has an has already announced an artificial intelligence policy. Kenya announced a digital economy blueprint. Senegal announced a digital Senegal 2025 strategy. And arguably the most ambitious now is Zambia under its new president, Hichilema. Hichilema is a businessman himself, a man of an entrepreneurial background, and he sees Zambia's future not in just things like copper mines and so on, which is what Zambia is famous for, but in making Zambia a tech sector hub, an investment hub. He wants to lower taxes, build digital facilitation, infrastructure, he's already gotten 40 African startups and venture capitalists to set up shop in Zambia. And he wants Zambia to be sort of the hub for the rest of Africa in the tech sector, but he needs assistance. He's got a tech sector working group in his government, but he's looking for ideas and he's looking for assistance. The Chinese are already there. And I stress this, they're already obviously building a lot of the 5G, 4G infrastructure in Africa through Huawei, but they're also they're investing a little bit. They're doing a lot of training. The Chinese billionaire Jack Ma announced an Africa Business Heroes Prize recently, $300,000 for the best African entrepreneurs, particularly in the digital space. And they see Africa as a place to set standards and regulations and ensure that their own version of how the digital economy of the world should be structured is effectively wins a number of governments to support them in Africa. Though to be fair, right now the European Union is more decisive in terms of regulatory framework. So some of the things, as Ambassador Singh mentioned, what we need, we of course have a vibrant tech sector in almost every aspect in our own country. And the question is, can we ride on that? At least that's a question for me. Can we ride on that success and merge that with what we do on the development partnerships? A couple of ideas come to mind. One is the issue of venture capital and investment. That's difficult, for no government should enter that. It's an extraordinarily difficult, risky sector. But we have a number of major investor platforms in India: Sequoia Capital, Chris Capital, Edelweiss, Premji Invest. Each of them is 2 to 3 times larger than the entire African ecosystem. They have enormous information about how to do these in developing country circumstances. Can we not partner with them? Can the government of India partner with them and say, let's set up an Africa-India investment fund, startup fund. Perhaps the government of India could provide startup capital and let these companies run them in Africa as a project between the two countries. They are capable of it. They are massively in size. And if they start working well, there's no reason for the government of India to continue to sponsor them. They can allow to be run as, after 5 or 10 years, run on their own steam. Second, as I've mentioned, countries like Zambia, Kenya, Senegal, Egypt are looking for help. And how do I set up an IT sector? How do I have a digital blueprint for the future? And the countries I've mentioned have already begun that process or announced it, but many others, from Nigeria to Gabon are all trying to put their own together. Can we do a road show and show them what we have done on the digital side? And we have a lot to show, whether it's biometric identification, the UPI, the Unified Payment Interface, the open e-commerce network that we plan to be launching in a few months. All of these are ideas that they either don't know about or should know about, getting a sense of what they can do as countries. I'll just also finally add that obviously there are other sectors of the economy we should be looking at. And I think two more ideas that come to mind. It would be useful, as we try to do with the Japanese, to have a very large, tangible, successful infrastructure project in Africa that can advertise our capacities. The Confederation of Indian Industries has repeatedly told me, at least, that they have developed extremely inexpensive infrastructure solutions based on their own experiences in India that they would like to promote, but they need an advertisement for these things. We have a number of big projects. I note the Nakala Logistics Corridor. If you notice, Jindal Global, recently got rights to the Mozite coal mine in Mozambique. That's a nearly 1 billion ton reserve. They also got a 912 Nakala Logistics Corridor along with it. And a port at the end. The Japanese are working with us in developing that. We already have an LNG terminal investment, though that's still taking a while to come up. Can we merge that with something that other projects that we can do on a development partnership level to show that not just as a private investment, but as a combined private-public partnership in a very troubled part of Mozambique, which needs development assistance, that India can show a sign to how you should do resource economic investment in Africa. And finally, I'll just end. The International Solar Alliance has already got a number of projects going. They're highly, should we say, distributed. They are rooftop solar, some finance, solar finance, agricultural solar. None of them make a very big splash. They're all very useful, but they're spread across a large portion of Africa. And to some degree, I would argue that impact, not just in terms of public relations, but even their economic impact is somewhat lost as a consequence. Can we consider a slightly more integrated project in which one region of Africa or even one country or part of a country is converted into a much more integrated green technology, solar, environmental project to show how India can help on a number of integrated ways in a developing country circumstance, again, something that we are familiar with. Let me end there. And if there are any questions, of course, later on, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you very much, Pramit, for living up to my expectations of a brilliant presentation. Yes, I think you made very valid points. So an infrastructure project is definitely required as a big symbol of what India and other democracies can do in Africa. And that is where trilateralism makes more sense to challenge the Chinese BRI. It should be an infrastructure project, but there are a lot of procurement issues which don't match. And that is the reason why the AAGC sort of withered away and have just become part of trilateral cooperation. But I think that idea should not be given, because we can also work with Europe against grow back better and things like that. The second part, you made this very interesting point about why not award some startups or things like that to do. So there is the Sankalp Africa Awards, who every year in February have a jury which selects 5 African startup ideas and puts them out for funding. Most of the funding comes from traditional donors, the DFIDs and the USAIDs, but also from new investment partners. So certainly, who in India can do at least sponsor one of those startups? But the company which does the Sankalp Award, they themselves do a lot of this, and they are now working on an ESG fund of $150 million for Africa, a third of which KfW of Germany has already provided. And you mentioned the International Solar Alliance. I think under that, something is happening in Mali. But India volunteered to support the ISA through lines of credit. And I was looking at the Exim Bank page today, and since 2019 March, it doesn't have any projects which are approved on their list. So there is something which is stymied the line of credit issue. So that is not seems to be a viable model anymore. So we have to look for hybrid finance models. And that is where the traditional credit and the traditional grant which MEA provides needs to be put into a fund which can be a revolving fund to support such things. Either you have to create a bankable project, or you have to create a startup, or you have to create a sustainability project. They should be able to take money from this fund, and when the project succeeds, return the money so it revolves. So some new idea like this, I believe, can implement several of the things that you have mentioned. Thank you very much indeed. I have now great pleasure in inviting Dr. Sankalp Gurjar from the Indian Council of World Affairs to please make his presentation. You have 12 minutes, sir. Please follow
Thank you,
my
sir.
guidelines.
Please, we'll do, sir. Thank you. Thank you for this presentation. While thinking about what to speak, as you said, no need to cover history because I was also wondering what to do because everybody knows what is our engagement with Africa. And in your presence, speaking about history is like repeating everything that you have already written in the book. So no point talking about it. What I thought was to focus on a specific sub-region of Africa, which is of my interest, that is Southwest Indian Ocean. I thought I would rather focus on four countries, Comoros, Madagascar, Seychelles, and Mauritius, which form this region, and maybe look at some of the divergences and convergences of our engagement with these countries, because the data indicates some very interesting trends when we're talking about these four countries and our engagement with them. So these countries are located, as we know, where our Indian Ocean engagement and Africa policy meet. Africa policy also has capacity building as a major dimension, whereas with Indian Ocean, strategy dominates. So these are the countries where our capacity building and strategic dimensions come together. Of which I come across this thing that Seychelles and Mauritius, we all know, is pretty intense. We are doing a lot with them. In fact, 1% of the entire Seychellois population had been trained by our ITEC program, which is pretty intense. Mauritius data is pretty impressive with Mauritius as well, where nearly, it's the largest recipient of our Africa-related scholarships. Even in terms of number of students who come on self-funded scholarships, Mauritius is among the top 5 countries. So this is something that is, if countries from this region, these two countries are dominating so much, then what happens with Madagascar and Comoros? And that is where I think these two countries have been slow on our radar, perhaps, because the engagement is not so much. If we are to look at comparative population and geostrategic importance, I think Comoros and Mauritius has similar populations, roughly in the 1 million bracket. Madagascar has about 2.7 crore people. So ideally, one would have thought that the engagement would be intense, but it's not really so. With Madagascar, it has been going up. With Comoros, it's not really so. So the data indicates that with Comoros, slots have been underutilized consistently, and that underutilization is at a great level. So for the last 4 years data that I have, of the 85 slots that have been offered under ITEC, I think only about 70 have been utilized, maybe less than that actually, 65. So with ICCR scholarships, that percentage falls even below. So of the 36 scholarships that have been offered under ICCR, Comoros has only used 8. Same with Madagascar, 107 were offered under ITEC, 60 were used. Under ICCR, 20 were offered, 2 have been used. In some years when we have offered scholarships and these countries have even refused to use those scholarships. So, as an academic, I want to raise this question where why is this happening? Perhaps one of the reasons would be that these two are Francophone countries, and courses that we are conducting in India are primarily in English. That would be one. French influence could be another one. But are there any other reasons that, because I don't know the answer for these questions, but, I just thought that with you, sir, with Pramit Pal, sir here, so maybe we can, discuss some of these things. Also, with respect to our engagement in general has not been, keeping in pace with our engagement with Seychelles. Or say, for example, Seychelles was offered 90 slots for civilian ITEC programs as compared to 85 for Comoros for a 4-year period. Countries from the same region, but why then there is this divergence? So these are the major trends that I thought we could focus on. Otherwise, larger development initiatives and everything else, I think, has been discussed, will be discussed. So this is what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gurjar. So, you raised an important point. Why are allocations of free items, ITEC scholarships, which include airfares and a trip to India, why are they not being utilized? So, in the case of Africa, where I have mentioned 18 new embassies are opened, What are our political objectives? All of them bilaterally support you against cross-border terrorism, all of them. All of them support you for a permanent seat on the Security Council. So when that happens, whether they vote for you or not, different issue. But you have got their statements. What are the new objectives that you have set other than achieving development cooperation penetration? So therefore, every mission that India has must be tasked with fulfilling its development cooperation goals, which means get all your ITEC slots utilized, get your scholarships utilized, make sure that at least one development cooperation project relevant to that area is handled. This requires very hard work, and MEA does not make it easier, because what we discussed earlier when Pramit spoke, we may want to do many things with the private sector, but MEA habitually wants to deal only with the public sector, because then they don't want to do tendering. They can give it on nomination basis, who will do the tender, all this. As a result, from development cooperation projects of MEA, the private sector is almost always excluded. I put it to you, the Pan-African E-Network project was done by TCIL. Would it not have been better done had private sector been involved, who could have commercialized the opportunities under it rather than allow that project to be closed down after 10 years? So when we are asking the lines of credit to have business plans and DPRs, for our development projects, there is no business plan. There is no sustainability. Then after we stop paying for it for 3 years, how will it work? So there is a very rare occurrence of the Entrepreneurship Development Training Center in Senegal. Amazingly successful thing. Amazingly successful. They are all Francophone. They cater to 8 Francophone countries. They were trained in India. They have trained over 7,000 people in that center. The same center offered to Zimbabwe doesn't do well at all, English speaking. So it is not always the language. It is the responsiveness of the host country, the passion they show, and the role of the Indian mission in pushing your development agenda. That is, I'm not denying that people will not come to India to study because they are only Francophone. I agree, there is a problem. But you have to go out and find people, and ambassadors and embassies should have it in their appraisal. Did you fulfill your development agenda? Every Indian embassy in Africa must have a development partnership link on their website. This is your main goal in Africa. This is what we always talk about. But when it comes to giving it prominence, then we falter. So I think that is where some amount of passion, some amount of enthusiasm to overcome difficulties is required. I speak too much in any case. Now I have great pleasure in inviting Dr. Ruchita Beri, Senior Research Associate. I don't know why they keep calling you this. You should say the boss of the Africa thought process in the Manohar Parrikar Institute of Defense Studies and Analysis. So, Ruchita, you have plenty of time. Go ahead.
Thank you, Ambassador Gurjit Singh, for your kind words. But I find I have a very difficult role to play here. I am coming as the last speaker, not just of this session, but of the entire day's deliberations on India's development partnership. So I am not really sure what new can I say on these issues, but somehow I think I will trudge on, and you bear with me. You said that I do have time. So I'm going to talk about 4 important trends in India-Africa development partnership, and also give 5 suggestions on how we can take it forward. So this has been reiterated by several people, including yourself, that first, India has often said that its engagement with Africa is unique and based on mutual benefit, contributing to Africa's development priorities through a consultative process. And And it's also been said that India's development engagement increases the local capacities within Africa. And this has been highlighted by n number of Indian leaders, including our Prime Minister Narendra Modi. During his address at the Ugandan parliament, he said that our development partnership will be guided by your priorities. So this has been something which we have been stating. Whether this is happening or not is something that we have to investigate. Second, the trend is that India's lines of credit have helped in enhancing African capacities in diverse sectors. And I'll take two case studies here, one that of agriculture and the other of solar energy. So in terms of agriculture, agriculture is very important. India's cooperation with African countries for food security, I feel, has increased remarkably in the last decade, given the fact that Africa possesses about 65% of the world's arable land, but the African region is heavily dependent on food import. And this is mainly because some of the African experts feel that this is a result of the overemphasis on export of cash crops rather than production of food crops by the African country. And this is something which they have inherited from the colonial times. So therefore, it's not strange that India's development assistance has been going on with African countries in this field, and it has offered lines of credit to a number of African countries, including those like Benin, Burkina Faso, Burundi, Cameroon, Cote d'Ivoire, Ethiopia, Ghana, Kenya, Mali, and Senegal. And in this regard, the cooperation has been towards improving agricultural production through appropriate and affordable technology, improving crop varieties, and also providing efficient methods of water management and irrigation. So the good news is that in some cases, India's development assistance has been beneficial. And I can give you the example of the irrigation project in Senegal, which led to six-fold increase in rice production. So both India and African countries are raising their investment in agribusiness and food processing industry, more so particularly because of the COVID times. The value chains are something that they need to work on, and here India can help the African countries. Also, the current Ukrainian crisis has brought food security issues to bear for most of the quite a few African countries. So I think food and agriculture will remain an important area of cooperation. The fact that the theme of AU for this year is nutrition makes India's development partnership in this field, I feel, very important. So the second area that I would like to talk about is solar energy. Now, access to sustainable energy for all is a major challenge facing the world today. And lack of modern and clean sources of energy is increasingly perceived as a vital impediment for sustainable growth, both in Africa and India. So it's no wonder that India and Africa have strived to increase cooperation in renewable energy, and particularly in the solar energy sources. It has been, we have talked about the International Solar Alliance, and about 41 African countries are signatory to it. And in 2018, India announced a line of credit worth 1.4 billion for African countries for implementation of off-grid solar energy projects. And these include countries like Mauritius, Mozambique, Nigeria, Niger, Sierra Leone, Sudan, and Senegal. I believe about half of them have been implemented and others are at various stages of implementation. Now, Ambassador Gurjit, you talked about financing and how, whether the lines of credits are really the right model. Here, I would like to say that during our, with reference to this solar energy project, during the last India-Africa Forum Summit, India announced that it would provide 1.2 billion US dollars to the African countries for solar energy. And now the LOC for solar energy under the Solar Alliance is also 1.4 billion. And when a question was raised about this to our officials, uh, we found that it's the same fund. So we are announcing a lot of things, but ultimately the pool of money is the same. So we've used the money which was earmarked for larger solar energy corporation under the ISA project. But the good news is that it has been used by the African countries. The third important trend I would like to talk about is training and capacity building have been the hallmark of India's development partnership with Africa. There's no two words about this, and ITEC remains an important pillar of India's development cooperation. But similarly, the India support for African students has been an important part of capacity building programs. Out of the 50,000 scholarships for African students announced in the India-Africa Forum Summit in 2015, I think almost all have been utilized by now. The third important area in terms of training I would like to mention is the Pan-Africa e-Network project. Now, you also talked about it earlier, Ambassador Gurjit Singh, but the important thing to notice here is that the Pan-Africa e-Network project, when it was launched in 2009, was a path-breaking project. It used fiber optics and satellite technology to connect 47 African countries with super specialty hospitals in India to provide telemedicine consultations, and also several universities in Africa for tele-education. But the new avatar, the e-Vidya Bharati and Arogya Bharati project, is web-based. So we have moved to a different technology now because that's more suitable. And we've launched only one of the, and this, there were two projects, that is the Vidya Bharati and Arogya Bharati. But I believe right now we've only launched one of the project, which is related to education. And the other portal has not come up as of now. So here the problem in terms of telemedicine that we are facing vis-a-vis providing this to the African countries is that we can, according to the African laws, we can provide consultation to an African doctor and not to an African patient. So an Indian super specialty specialist can provide his services to another specialist in Africa, but not to the patient directly. So I'm not really sure how effective this would be in terms of providing telemedicine. The idea, I think, would be in terms of providing continuing medical education to the African doctors, nurses, and paramedical personnel, which started, this e-training started during the COVID pandemic and may continue in future. The last point in the training bit, which I would like to highlight, is what you talked again about, is the diplomats training under the FSI, the Foreign Service Institute, or the Sushma Swaraj Foreign Service Institute. So I believe I've done some research and I found that they have trained about 1,255 African diplomats ever since they were set up, which was sometime in the 90s. But out of these, about 733 were trained after 2014. So increasingly, there's a spurt in training the African diplomats. And this is, I feel, request-based. The African countries are interested in India training their diplomats. And so this has been happening. The fourth trend that I would like to talk about is the trilateral cooperation with like-minded countries. Now, we have entered into some cooperation with the United States Agency for International Development, the USAID, on food security issues in select African countries, the UK's Department for International Development, has funded supporting India's trade preference for Africa CETA program. And we've also been working with Japan and UAE. And recently, the first India-EU dialogue on Africa called for trilateral cooperation between India and African countries and the EU. But I'm not really sure how this will take off. There have been hurdles in past. Whether we will be able to succeed in trilateral cooperation remains to be seen. Fifth, and now I'd like to give my 5 suggestions as to how our partnership with Africa in terms of development should go about in future. The first point is timely completion of projects. So there have been some improvement in the implementation recent years. It could be because of the new rules of the lines of credit project, because I believe some of the reasons for the delay in implementation also was because the private vendors that were involved in delivering these projects were not really some who had experience in completing these infrastructures in past. So that is something which the government is already looking at, and hopefully we would work on timely completion. But here it's quite evident that India is always compared to China in this regard, because China is pretty famous for its delivery, that it always delivers its projects in time, unlike countries like India. Well, we always say that India is a democratic country. It has several checks and balances, but the fact remains that our record is not so great. Again, I would like to point to you a case of India-Africa Health Fund, which was announced by our government at the 3rd India-Africa Forum Summit. To my knowledge, this fund of $10 million has not been utilized till now. And I feel that the pandemic has brought us this timely manner to really implement this fund in utilizing it to develop hospitals in African countries. We had a delegation in IDSA from Nigeria recently, and they emphasized that they need India's support in setting up the health infrastructure in their country. And they also talked about medical tourism, that the government should do something in institutionalizing the medical tourism to India. So there is a public-private partnership needed to I feel, timely completion of projects in Africa. The second point that I would like to talk of is, again, greater involvement of private sector and civil society organizations. The private sector is very much involved. The various activities and the conclaves that have been held by the CII and FICCI indicate that the private sector is very much interested in greater role. We may push our banking sector to be more proactive and open up branches in African countries that would deal with the financial aspects of this. Similarly, the civil society organizations, Barefoot College and the organizations like Seva are already there. There are others like Pratham who are playing an important role and may be used by the government in working out a framework of cooperation with both the private and the civil society organization. Third important aspect I would like to focus here is that the African countries in the post-COVID period are really looking forward towards setting up manufacturing units within their countries. Going vocal for local is also a chant for Africa. So here, India can help the African countries in setting up manufacturing hubs in Africa. Here again, the role of private sector would be extremely important, and a PPP model would be really preferred mode in this regard. The fourth important suggestion that I would like to make is regarding the investment in human resources, which I think would be a key to the development in Africa, and which has been a focus of our engagement with the African countries in terms of development partnership. So we may continue with that. But however, what are the we have to look at the concerns of the African students too, both in terms of social and also in terms of career. They feel that they do not have any job opportunities, that education in India does not lead to job opportunities or even on-job training within India. So there should be some way to facilitate some kind of training. I'm not sure, this is maybe a future research project for some, to look into how many private sector companies in India offer African students who study in India a job or an internship once they complete their education in India. And with the incidence of race attacks on African nationals, especially students, that also impacts on the African student psyche. And I've interviewed some of these students who feel that they do not want to continue in India after a few months because of all these issues. So I would like to end here and end by giving a statement which was made by President Kagame of Rwanda. He says that our two countries share similar ambitions for prosperity and well-being of our citizens, and we appreciate India's support to Rwanda's development agenda. Now, it remains to be seen that how long would this positive image of India continue. So I feel that India, in terms of both at the government level, private sector, at the academic level, think tank level, we have to work in a partnership to see that this goodwill that exists for India in Africa continues. Thank you, sir. I'll stop here.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ruchita Beri. You were last, but you were certainly not the least, as you were apprehensive about. You have given very detailed proposal, which I think will make the report on this session very substantive. Just a few remarks. You mentioned the health fund. The health fund has been used to supply medicines, vaccines, paracetamol, many things. And there was a India-Africa Health Sciences Portal and training programs. I think ICMR. I think that is also part of the health fund. You asked about the solar projects. So if you look at Exim Bank's pipeline, which means LOCs offered but not signed, it is huge. And there are at least 8 African solar projects in that. And this is not updated since a year ago. So African countries, due to debt stress, are not taking LOCs. Exim Bank's own website pipeline not updated for last 1 year. The last approvals shown are of March 2019. So it is no point blaming Gurjit Singh for saying that the LOCs don't work, because your website says they don't work anymore. So you need a new way to deal with it. You also mentioned about training African students. So there was a program we did with the All India Management Association saying be your own boss or something like that. Summer internships in, I think, 12 different cities over a period of 3 years funded by MEA, where students, African students in India, were actually given training and mentoring on how they could go back and hopefully set up their own business rather than seek a job. But again, the issue came out of funding, which we could not solve. But I'm going to leave it there. Are there any questions?
So, there's a question.
There is one question from Director Research, Dr. Nivedita Ray.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Dr. Ray.
First of all, thank you all for a very, very interesting presentation. I'm listening to it, every time we talk about, we have so many instruments that government has been, in terms of our development cooperation, particularly relating to our capacity building and ITech, which Sankalp raised. And sir, you mentioned about, our mission should be charged in finding out, basically filling up the slots. But the question is our scholarship programs or training programs attractive to them? That is more important to ask. We do say that, our scholarship programs we fill the slots. But my own observation is, when I listen to various students' concerns, I find that some of the concerns that have been raised about our scholarship is about good living conditions in hostels, and also whether, and even about our colleges which offer scholarships. Sometimes African students do not find those colleges apt for their own, good enough for their own education skills. So we need to revisit these things when we allocate scholarships, and regarding which are the, some way we need to some way make a kind of a panel of universities or colleges which can, where the students can be accommodated. This is one thing that we can make our scholarship programs more attractive for African students, which they find it useful. The question is the African scholarship programs useful? We have a Study India program by Ministry of Human Resource, Ministry of HRD. But if you look at the students that come to that program, so only 2 countries of Africa are availing that, only Sudan and Nigeria, not many countries. So it's important to revisit our own policy schemes to see whether our initiative, whether they are attractive enough for the student, for the countries concerned. Second, my own way of looking at development cooperation, particularly in Africa, we have a larger India development cooperation strategies with instruments placed. But I do feel that we need to look more region-wise and look at what are the development challenges, and start looking at, maybe need to look at how to rethink our development strategy cooperation. We have different instruments. For example, if you look at India, Africa, the challenges that we face, whether it is food security or health security or about climate change, can we reorient and look at this strategy from a development goal perspective? For example, Ruchita mentioned about food security and health security. You mentioned about we have an India Health Fund. But are our instruments that we are doing through LOCs and other capacity building programs that we have, are we really looking at from a developmental goal perspective? If we start looking from a development goal perspective, then perhaps we can look at these instruments that India provides and have a more outcome-based approach, development goal outcome-based approach. For example, what we have done in food security challenges, we don't know. We have, each country-wise, we have different projects need-based. But we try to assess what India has done on addressing food security in Africa, we perhaps do not have much answer. When we try to see what India has done in the health security, perhaps we don't have that answers. But as we start rethinking our strategy in more of addressing the development goals rather than just looking from the instruments that we provide. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ray. I think there are no other questions, and we're also out of time. So before I conclude, I would just like to thank ICWA for this opportunity. And I would like to say this, that given your last point, I think after this webinar, you should look at a track 1.5 engagement at the Pan-African level between India and Africa, and also a track 1.5 with the functioning RECs like East African Community, SADC, ECOWAS, the ones which work. And ICWA can lead that. And you bring in a mixture of officials of those bodies plus academics and businessmen, and come up with a plan which we can give to MEA, say this is what they want to do. Somewhere down the line, this 3-tiered cooperation with Africa has lapsed, and we are now doing only bilateral. It's fine, we can continue doing bilateral, but the exchange of thinking with the REX and the African Union at the Pan-African level, I think that is very important. And this doesn't have to be sporadic, that we pick up the available academics and call them, but that has to be structured in a 1.5. So with that, Pramit, would you like to say anything to conclude?
No, I think we've covered quite a bit. I think the only thing that I'll stress, as you have already begun, you had begun by saying that the Indian private sector has a lot of capabilities, and some of those should be tapped, especially in the technology field and in the finance field, both of which we are particularly good at, and particularly good at in terms of in a developing country environment. Some of them, I've worked with some of these funds, and they're remarkable, the kind of data and the information that they put into working out who is capable or who is worth investing in. I would have several funds, not just one. I would say give it to 4 or 5 such Indian funds, have Government of India backing, and let them compete with each other. I would do the same thing you were mentioning, somebody mentioned, Dr. Ray mentioned about students in universities here. I would have universities compete, and I would have a feedback loop with the students themselves, and drop the universities that fail, that come out at the bottom of the list. I would do the same thing with the venture capital fund.
Thank you. Yes, I think that's a good point. There are 25,000 African students in India. Only 1,000 are in scholarship. So it is not that they are a big number of scholarship holders. Secondly, for countries which don't have fulfillment of their scholarship number, you should simply see if any national from that country got admission on his own in India and offer him a scholarship against that country's quota. That is one way of filling up the gaps. Dr. Beri, would you like to say something in conclusion?
Yeah, thank you, Ambassador Gurjit. I would first of all like to thank the organizers like you, and I think this is a very important discussion that we are having, especially we are marking the 10-year of DPA. I would like to say that in terms of what Dr. Nivedita Ray said, that that we have to look at the development goals of each of the African countries. Africa is not a monolith. We do understand there are 54 countries. So if India has to look further into how we can support the African interests, then we'll have to go regionally initially, and maybe bilateral is already happening, but regionally we can maybe find out what are the development priorities and then move forward in terms of supporting these countries on those. And secondly, while I talked of the African students and suggested that there should be some kind of an internship, which you said that it's already been done in some case, but I've also met in my in the last few years several young African professionals who've been employed by companies like TCS. And when I asked them that, have you studied in India? They said, no, we've come directly from our country, whether it is, say, Cote d'Ivoire or Morocco or Uganda. So I was just proposing that, maybe we need to sign up some formal agreements with certain companies. You used to have this, at the end of the term, you would have on-campus placement. So there could be some kind of a thing that could be worked out with some private companies for providing internships to these students, especially professional students, who are pursuing professional courses within India.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you so much. Dr. Sankalp Gurjar, you will have the last word, please.
No, sir. Thank you. All good.
Thank you. I see Mr. Madan Lal Raigar, Director DP, is here. Would you like to say anything? Mr. Raigar? I don't hear it. So I think it is now almost time. So I hand back to the organizers and once again thank them for this dedicated session to Africa. And I hope that the panelists gave you substantive points to make a good report to MEA on how to redirect the program of development partnership in the years ahead. I thank Dr. Pramit Pal Choudhury, Dr. Ruchita Beri, and Dr. Sankalp Gurjar for their valuable contributions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ambassador Singh. I also thank the speakers for sharing their views. With this, we come to the end of day one of our two-day seminar. We will join back tomorrow for the second day of our seminar at 1100 hours. Thank you for joining with us. Have a great day ahead.